The sea was a frozen expanse of steel-gray water, stretching endlessly in every direction, and on the morning of December 20th, 1943, it held a deadly secret. The crests of the waves rose and fell, indifferent to the drama unfolding beneath. The German U-boat crews of the Atlantic were on edge. The war had already entered a brutal phase. The Allies were strengthening their grip on the seas. As night fell on the North Atlantic, the sound of the wind howling through the periscope of U-505 was drowned by the tense murmurs of the crew. They had been hunting for Allied convoys for days, prowling like wolves in the dark, ready to strike when the opportunity arose. But on this night, something changed. The sea around the U-boat felt different. There was a palpable tension in the air as U-505's captain, Oberleutnant zur See Klaus-Dieter Röver, peered through the periscope. A convoy was in sight, just beyond the horizon, an easy target. But something was wrong. It wasn't just the usual sound of the convoy's engines. There was an unsettling hum in the distance. The convoy were too close together, too tight in formation. A suspicion lurked in Röver's mind. This was no ordinary convoy. The submarine's crew held their breath as the ship's sonar operator adjusted the dials, trying to get a clearer signal. The convoy. It's coming towards us, he muttered, his voice thick with confusion. Röver ordered the crew to go deeper. They would need to remain undetected. But the hum, it grew louder. And then, without warning, a flicker of light appeared on the horizon. It wasn't a ship. It was something much larger. The U-505's crew watched in disbelief as an enormous vessel emerged from the shadows of the convoy. A sleek, almost ghostly silhouette, it moved with unsettling speed and precision. It wasn't an escort ship. It wasn't a destroyer or even a battleship. This was something else entirely, a mothership, one that had been hidden from the eyes of the enemy for years. This revelation would shock the U-boat crews, who had grown accustomed to the sight of Allied merchant ships and warships. The convoy's hidden weapon was a floating fortress, a mobile operations base, capable of launching attacks on the German submarines from an unexpected distance. It was a weapon the German Kriegsmarine hadn't anticipated, a convoy's secret weapon that would change the course of the battle in the Atlantic. The surprise wasn't just in its sudden appearance, but in the role it played in the convoy's defense. The ship was equipped with advanced radar and radio technology, far surpassing anything the Germans had seen before. It was equipped to launch a defensive strike before the enemy even knew it was there. For the U-505 and the other U-boats in the area, it was a terrifying new challenge. This wasn't just a convoy. It was an organized, coordinated operation designed to neutralize the threat of the U-boats long before they could get within striking distance. The Germans had thought the convoy was ripe for attack, unaware that the true battle was just beginning. As the U-505 dove deeper into the cold Atlantic waters, Röver's mind raced. The situation had just shifted. Their target was no longer vulnerable. The ship was a formidable opponent, and it would take every bit of the U-boat crew's skill and experience to outmaneuver this new threat. The stage was set for a confrontation that neither side expected. Across the convoy, the mothership's radar operators worked tirelessly, scanning the waters for any sign of the lurking U-boats. They were aware of the German submarine threat, but they had yet to face such a sophisticated and coordinated response. The German U-boats, once the undisputed kings of the Atlantic, now found themselves facing an enemy that could strike before they even had a chance to fire a torpedo. The American convoy, reinforced by the mothership, moved steadily through the rough waters, its crew unaware of the drama unfolding just below the surface. The U-505 remained submerged, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The tension between the U-boat crew and the unknown force was palpable. With the convoy moving closer and closer, the question lingered in the air: would the U-505 and its sister ships be able to adapt to this new reality? Or would the Allies' secret weapon turn the tide of the war in the Atlantic forever? And then, just as Röver made the decision to engage, a new signal appeared on the sonar. Anothermother ship. The Allies had more than one. The game was changing. The U-boat crews, who once held the upper hand in these waters, were about to learn the true meaning of being outgunned and outwitted. The mystery of the American convoy's hidden mothership was far from over. But one thing was certain: the German U-boat crews had underestimated their enemies. The enemy was learning and adapting, and they were no longer the underdogs in this battle for control of the Atlantic. As the German U-boat crews pondered their next move, the convoy, now accompanied by its secret weapon, surged forward through the icy waters of the North Atlantic. The motherships, these vast floating fortresses, had been designed with one purpose in mind: to neutralize the U-boat threat once and for all. It was a weapon of war that the Germans had never seen coming, a weapon that would strike at the very heart of their naval dominance. The mothership wasn't just a large vessel. It was a mobile headquarters, a floating command center equipped with cutting-edge radar systems and an arsenal of sophisticated anti-submarine technologies. Its most lethal feature, however, was its ability to launch counterattacks before the enemy had even identified a target. Unlike traditional escort ships, which relied on depth charges and destroyers for defense, the mothership could detect a U-boat from miles away, allowing it to strike preemptively. The Germans had always relied on their stealth and cunning to attack convoys, but now the Allies were leveling the playing field. The U-boats, once the undisputed terror of the Atlantic, were suddenly vulnerable. On December 21st, 1943, the convoy came into full view of the U-505's crew. The weather had worsened, the sea growing rougher as the storm clouds gathered above. Despite the chaos of the waves, Röver maintained his focus. They had to act quickly. He knew that if they couldn't break through the convoy's defense, their mission would fail. The German strategy had always been to strike fast and vanish before the enemy could react. But now, with the mothership in play, they were facing an opponent that could respond just as quickly. This was no longer a battle of attrition. It was a race for supremacy in a new kind of warfare. Röver's mind raced as he processed the information. The convoy's secret weapon was equipped with advanced radar systems that were capable of detecting submarines from miles away. The Germans had not fully appreciated the power of radar until they saw it in action. It was an invention that had changed the rules of naval combat. By the time a U-boat surfaced or made its presence known, the convoy's mothership could already launch its counterattack. The first confrontation came just after dawn, when U-505 was within striking range. Röver had his crew prepare for the attack. The submarine's torpedo tubes were loaded, the crew tense, waiting for his command. But as the U-boat surged toward its target, a sharp ping echoed through the water. It was the unmistakable sound of radar. The mothership detected them. Röver's pulse quickened. They had no time to waste. The first volley of torpedoes shot from the U-505's tubes, slicing through the water. But before the U-boat could dive deeper, a series of explosions erupted from the convoy's formation. Depth charges. The mothership launched its counterstrike, and it was far more advanced than anything the Germans had anticipated. The depth charges exploded with terrifying force, shaking the hull of the U-505 as it plunged deeper into the cold abyss. Röver barked orders, commanding his crew to dive further away from the onslaught. But the mothership was relentless. It had anticipated their every move, striking preemptively with pinpoint accuracy. What followed was a cat-and-mouse game like no other. The U-505 and the convoy circled each other, each side aware of the other's presence, but unable to land a decisive blow. The U-boat crew's nerves were fraying, their patience tested by the constant threat of being detected. The mothership, with its radar and advanced sonar systems, kept the Germans on edge. For the first time in the war, the U-boat crews were playing defense. Their once precise attacks had turned into a struggle for survival. Röver and his crew were not alone in their predicament. Across the Atlantic, other U-boats found themselves trapped in a similar predicament. As the motherships continued to patrol the waters, the German submarine fleet began to realize that their old tactics, submerging and waiting for the perfect strike, were no longer effective. The Allies had evolved. They were no longer the passive targets of U-boat raids, but had become the hunters themselves. Meanwhile, on board the American convoy's motherships, the atmosphere was one of quiet confidence. The crews of these ships were aware that they were the key to breaking the U-boat threat. They had been tasked with an unprecedented responsibility, to not only protect the convoy but to hunt down and eliminate the U-boat menace. Their radar operators were highly trained, and their sonar systems were state-of-the-art. They knew that, in the harsh and unpredictable waters of the North Atlantic, every second counted. The U-boats were out there, waiting to strike, but now they were no longer the predators. They were the prey. In the coming days, the battle between the U-boats and the Allied motherships would intensify. The Germans would try everything to break the convoy's defenses, launching torpedo after torpedo, only to see them intercepted by the sophisticated countermeasures of the convoy. Themothar ships would become the symbol of a new era of naval warfare, one where technology and innovation had outpaced the traditional tactics of surprise and stealth. The Allies had taken the fight to the Germans, and they had done so with a weapon that could not be ignored. As the days turned to weeks, the stakes grew higher. The German U-boat crews, once masters of the sea, were now facing an adversary they could neither see nor outmaneuver. The convoy's hidden mother ships had leveled the playing field, and the Germans were struggling to keep up. With each failed attack, their frustration grew, but so too did their respect for the new weapon that had shifted the balance of power in the Atlantic. The fight for the seas was far from over. But the German U-boats, once the terror of the Atlantic, were about to learn that even the most formidable predators can become prey. And in the cold, relentless waters of the North Atlantic, the only certainty was that the war for control of the sea had just entered a new, terrifying phase. The German U-boats, now fully aware of the Allies' new weapon, found themselves trapped in a game of cat and mouse they were not prepared for. Themothar ships, once a mystery, had revealed their terrifying potential. Equipped with the latest radar and sonar systems, these floating fortresses were no longer mere escorts. They were the spearheads of the convoy's defense, hunting the U-boats with the precision of a trained predator. The Germans were no longer the apex threat in the Atlantic. In the weeks that followed, the U-boats struggled to adapt. Their traditional methods of attack, honed over years of stealth and surprise, now seemed outdated. The old tricks, remaining submerged, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, had become increasingly futile. The motherships, always one step ahead, had effectively neutralized the U-boat's primary strength, surprise. Their radar systems could detect the faintest disturbances in the water, alerting them to a U-boat's presence long before it had a chance to launch a torpedo. On January 3, 1944, the U-505, along with several other submarines, was ordered to attack a newly discovered convoy off the coast of Newfoundland. The mission was clear: destroy the convoy before it could reach the safety of Allied air support. But as the U-505 and its comrades closed in, they once again encountered the unmistakable hum of the convoy's radar system. Themothar ship was already aware of their presence. Röver had hoped for a lucky strike, but the odds were against him. His crew was exhausted, their morale low after a series of failed attacks. The U-boat was now on a collision course with disaster. The convoy, supported by its deadly mother ship, had changed the rules of engagement. No longer could the U-boats rely on their stealth. No longer could they launch an attack and retreat into the depths, undetected. The Allies had shifted the balance of power in the Atlantic, and the Germans had no choice but to adapt or perish. Röver, despite the overwhelming odds, made one last attempt to strike. His crew was already at battle stations, the torpedoes loaded and ready. They surfaced quickly, hoping to catch the convoy off guard. But as soon as the U-505 breached the surface, the mothership's radar locked onto it with ruthless efficiency. A split second later, depth charges rained down on the U-boat, shaking it to its very core. The crew scrambled, trying to evade the explosion, but the damage was done. The U-505, crippled by the depth charges, was forced to retreat once again, retreating to the depths in a desperate attempt to escape. Meanwhile, the convoy's mother ship, untouched by the German attack, continued its deadly patrol. The radar operators on board were calm and methodical, their eyes trained on the sonar screens, constantly scanning for any signs of danger. They were a new breed of warriors, fighting a silent, invisible battle. For the first time in the war, it wasn't the U-boat crews hunting the convoys. It was the convoys themselves hunting the U-boats. The impact of Themothar ships in the battle in the Atlantic was profound. The U-boats, once the most feared force in the Atlantic, were now being hunted, their every move tracked and countered by the Allies. The days of stealthy, unpredictable attacks were over. The Allies had learned from their earlier defeats and had adapted to the evolving threat posed by the German submarines. The result was a dramatic shift in tactics and strategy. By early 1944, the convoy's mother ships had become an integral part of the Allied strategy in the Atlantic. Their radar systems, which had once seemed like an advantage, were now a game-changer. The Germans, unable to compete with the sophistication of the new technology, found themselves forced to change their tactics. They could no longer rely on their stealth and speed. Themothor made it clear the U-boat era was coming to an end. The psychological impact on the German crews was immense. They had grown accustomed to the feeling of power, of being the hunters in the vast expanse of the Atlantic. But now, with the advent of motherships, they were no longer in control. Their every move was monitored, their attacks neutralized before they could even begin. The constant tension and the fear of being detected began to take their toll on the morale of the U-boat crews. They were no longer the hunters. They were the prey to eye in the months that followed. The Allies continued to gain the upper hand in the Atlantic. Motherships, with their advanced radar and anti-submarine technologies, played a pivotal role in this shift. As the U-boat crews struggled to adapt, they found themselves facing a new reality. They could no longer dominate the seas. The Convoy's motherships had ensured that the impact of the motherships would be felt long after the war ended. They represented a shift in naval warfare, one that emphasized technology, coordination, and the ability to strike before the enemy had a chance to react. The U-boats, once the terror of the Atlantic, had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, and outgunned by an enemy that had learned how to fight back. The legacy of the motherships would shape naval tactics for years to come, leaving a lasting mark on the way battles would be fought in the years after World War I. The summer of 1944. The tide of the war in the Atlantic had shifted decisively in favor of the Allies. The U-boats, once feared for their speed and stealth, were now being hunted by their own prey. Themothor had proven that technology and innovation could outmatch even the most formidable forces. And as the Germans scrambled to adjust, they were forced to confront the undeniable truth. The balance of power in the Atlantic had changed forever. The Allies had won the war for the sea.